All right, cool. So, I guess just to start, could you tell me about your personal background and what got you interested in the CCESP, like when you were a student here?
Sure, yeah. So I was at 14 at Dartmouth, and I grew up in Wellesley, so nearby, and had parents who were both physicians. And when I was a sophomore in high school, my father would take trips to a rural hospital in India.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went with him one year and wanted to find a way to contribute. And so he was doing surgeries on patients, but one of the major issues was that he wasn't able to do follow-up for the patients. And so I helped to set up a very basic telemedicine sort of system that would allow him to do follow-up on the patients, because the nurses there could use scopes that were attached to the computer, like an endoscope in their ear, or a camera looking in their throat to basically see how they were healing, if they needed antibiotics.
And your dad would be seeing the video feed from
here,
from back home?
Yeah,
wow,
yeah,
that's wild.
So
That's awesome.
So for me, that was really cool that I could feel like I could have an impact as someone coming from abroad and someone who was only a sophomore.
This was in high school?
Yeah, sophomore year in high school.
What did you major in at Dartmouth?
I majored in anthropology, focused on global health and medicine. It was a modified major, so I took classes kind of related to international health.
Okay.
And then I minored in biology.
Okay. So you think that your experience with what your dad was doing in India in high school, that got you interested in the idea of the CCESP?
Yeah, so that definitely did. And then I took Spanish throughout high school and in college. And I'd gotten to travel a lot with my family while I was growing up. I was really lucky to get to do that. And so I had an interest in sort of other cultures and connecting with them and learning about the way that they approach the world, because I think that everyone there's so many different perspectives in terms of the right way to do things, and just different understandings of what everyday life is. And so I think it's really interesting to be able to understand that and connect.
I totally agree. Actually, similar things are what got me interested in this trip also.
Nice, that's great.
So when you went on the CCESP, what part of Nicaragua did you go to that year?
So we went to the northeastern part of the country. It's
the Ron?
The Ron,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
So we went to Ciuna.
Mm-hmm. Do you know the actual town or the city?
So, let's see. So Rosa. Let me see if I can remember. So, because we had the two teams, one went to, I think it was Rosa Grande was where I think we were, but I should make sure.
This year we're going.
Do you know where you're going?
Yeah, this year we're going to Hormiguero, which is like a town. I think it's in Ciuna. I think Ciuna's like a larger area, right?
It's a larger area, yeah.
And then we're going there because they recently built a Casa Materna, which is like a maternity home for pregnant women.
Awesome.
And I guess that's going to be our main base of operations there. So I think it's kind of cool that the CCESP has been in the same area, but going to slightly different areas every year.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you're still working with bridges, or?
Yeah, we are, definitely.
Nice.
So when you got there, what was your overall impression of the country, Ciuna, the people you met, the place that you spent the trip?
Yeah, so they were just an incredibly giving, welcoming group of people, and it was really interesting to learn from them about the cultural background. I remember one of the people who we did carpentry with, we would go around and build cook stoves in a few of the homes, part of a Bridges program, because they reduce the emissions of smoke into the house. And so we were working with him, and he was talking about his experience fighting in the war, and his beliefs on politics now, and so it was really interesting just to kind of hear what his experience was and how he felt that the government had sort of neglected the area that they were in, and just sort of let it kind of because that was where a lot of the rebels were fighting from, in the northeastern part. So he was talking about how they've kind of been neglected and just sort of on their own figuring it out, and the challenges of that.
That's really cool to hear about the war from someone who was in it, because you can always read like the dominant, standard history in a textbook or on Wikipedia, but every person has like a different take on it, obviously.
Yeah, and the community was so welcoming. I remember they like put on like a little show for us with a performance when we arrived, and
that's great.
It was great to just kind of meet people throughout.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess from like a medical perspective now, you're on the CH team, right? What were some of the gravest medical problems that you personally witnessed when you were there? And did you see any being really well addressed by, say, Bridges or other NGOs, or really poorly addressed and ignored even, or not recognized?
So I would say there was one situation where a woman came and I believe she was having heart palpitations or something of that nature. And so we wanted to send her to the nearest town to get an EKG, but she didn't have the money to afford the bus. And so at least when we were running the program, we had sort of a fund of money that we could use if people really needed it for medically related transportation and things like that. And so we had to decide, like, okay, does this case warrant using the funds? Why or why not? And so in her case, like, she was able to get the EKG to come back, and we could, and then that way she could also get care and advice from people with more expertise in the in CUNA. So, so in that sense, like, it was useful because we were able to connect someone who otherwise wouldn't have had access to that sort of medical technology to that type of technology, and to the treatment that comes with it, because with these heart concerns you can't really diagnose anything if you don't know what's kind of going on, the underlying problem, and an EKG will give you that
definitely
information. Other things I remember, there was a...
So that what you just talked about is something that you would consider something that's being done well?
Yeah, I think, and that's one of the biggest challenges with these short-term service trips, is that really doing medicine well requires ideally a sort of a long-term relationship between a provider and a patient, or between kind of a system where they go consistently for their care. And in a short-term model, that's really challenging.
It's tough to have that kind of continuity.
Right. And so I think hearing that you're going to go to a Casa Materna that will kind of exist in the community for a while, and the people who work there will be able to learn more about, okay, like, how are birth practices working here? Like, what are the challenges women face? Do they know about, like, taking folic acid supplementation? Getting ideas, whereas, and so you'll be able to learn from them about kind of what things are like there in aggregate.
So I don't understand it totally, but what Professor Moody has been saying about the Casa Materna is that it's going to be sort of a nexus that will service people all over the area. So say a woman's pregnant, they'll try and spread the word that the Casa Materna exists and tell them, if you're due at this time, you should come down maybe like a month beforehand and just stay there. And I think that if you can have the woman there in like those crucial months of pregnancy, you might get a lot more longitudinal care, long-term care, like you were talking about. So it actually sounds like it could be a solution to what we were talking about before.
And I actually did a research paper on a Casa Materna in Honduras, and in looking into those models, I mean, it varies sort of what the goal is, but their main goal was to treat women who had more serious births that had a higher likelihood of having a problem. And so those women would stay overnight, and so I think that kind of model is really a good one. But and one of the things I was looking at was whether there was an effective, whether they understood the culture well enough of the people who were coming for care to give them good care. And so a lot of the hospitals there where the women would go were very sort of didn't embrace the culture. For example, they would kick out the family members. And in traditional births, in Mayan communities, the whole family is there. And it's like a shared experience with, I think it may have just been all the women in the family or something like that. But the idea was that there was a sense of togetherness, and in the hospital this person was completely alone and just with the medical professionals. And so that decreased, and they had very low numbers of Mayans coming to the hospital. And so they were trying to, so I was looking into like, why is that? And they were generally using traditional birth attendants. So that would be something that's interesting to look at, is how well, and talk to patients about, like, how well do they feel welcome here? Do they think there are things that they could do better, At the same time, like, keeping in mind that you're a guest sort of in that place, so considering that. But you can start to get a sense of how people are feeling, if there are things that they think could be done better, because that'll be instructive for you about, okay, how can you do this work well so that people feel welcome despite coming from a different background than the Western medical system.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, that's a good insight, and it's actually pretty specific to the Casa Materna we're going to be going to, so I'll definitely think about that. That was a good start. And you said you did a paper on this?
Yeah, so it was just in a class. It was an anthropology class.
Okay. So when you went to the CCESP and you were on the CH team, what kind of health services did you supply to the people there? And did you see any sort of like sustainability, lack of sustainability, or how do you think that the people interpreted your presence? Were they glad to have you there, or what did you feel?
Sure. So I think the people really were glad to have us. I think that the medical service that we had set up had been there for a number of years, and so it was something that the community knew about and looked forward to. In terms of the sort of things that we were doing, we would mainly, each person would be seen. Typically, the way the clinic was set up is that there would be Bridges volunteers outside who would take down the names and figure out the order, because there's often a large number of people. And then then each medical student, the fourth years, who at that point they're about ready to become doctors, so they have a lot of knowledge, and they would be overseen by the Dartmouth physicians. So we had, let's see if I can remember now. We had Jack. We had three MDs with us.
Okay.
And so they would rotate through, working with other students versus seeing patients themselves, and we were overwhelmed with people. And then when the med students had a question, then the MD would pop in and help them. And so then if they needed a prescription, we had brought down a lot of medications, and they would go to the pharmacy and get that. So typically things that people could use were Advil, Tylenol, because a lot of them had chronic pain just from working in the field.
Yeah, I heard about that.
And so that was kind of a major issue. And then other things like anti-parasite medications, that's a big issue there. And ideally, people would be treated regularly to clear parasites. And yeah, so those were kind of the recurring things. And then people would have, like, for example, they might have a urinary tract infection, so we could do like rapid urine dipsticks to determine if they have an infection, and then treat them with antibiotics.
I'm actually doing a thesis on that, so we can talk about that later.
Yeah.
Cool.
And yeah, in terms of the sustainability of it, I think that's definitely a challenge, because it's a short-term service trip, it's hard to sort of implement a longer-term program. And I know they've tried this in the past in terms of like educating people about stretching and stuff like that, but like that's not realistically practical given all the work that they're, it's just
they can't stop like farming.
Right.
Exactly.
And maybe you could, if there was a locally driven program for, okay, how can we reduce injuries, or how can we decrease, there are potentially ways you could do the farming in a way that maybe you decrease the number of injuries. I don't know if such a thing is possible, but maybe like if they're bending over all the time, like finding ways to decrease that. That might be possible, but the only way you could figure that out is with someone who works there every day, working in the fields, and knows, you know?
Yeah.
And so without that sort of a long-term local perspective, it's hard to kind of come up with a program that's going to solve those sorts of systemic or long or kind of chronic issues effectively.
Yeah, I definitely agree. You need a lot of community input.
Yeah.
So when we were talking about sustainability just now, I was thinking about how you guys distributed a lot of like antibiotics and other medications. So I know that a big issue with meds, especially antibiotics, is that you take it for the full course of the prescription.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that when the people got those products, you know, the physicians or med students would explain to them that they have to finish it and they have to take it, you know, twice a day or whatever. But how, I guess, like, just in your mind, do you think that most people complied with it after you left? I know it's hard to really know for sure.
Yeah. So I don't know. We definitely did try to explain it. We would put in the bag sort of a slip on how to take it.
Yeah.
But I think probably just even from working here, people frequently, even when explained, you know, and the nice thing is there's no translator here. There's no, you know, people clearly, as long as they're listening, you know, they know what you're telling them. So there isn't that issue. And even still, they don't take everything, and people will frequently say, you know, I have medication that I have this left over from I have these antibiotics left over from last time. Let me pop a few of those. And then you learn about resistance, and you're like, wow, this is really the worst strategy you could possibly have.
One, they're probably expired, too. You should have finished them in the first place.
Right. So I've definitely had some, like, discussions with patients about, like, you know, really, like, here's how you should do it, et cetera. But it's really challenging. And so just based on my experience here, my guess is that probably given all the language barriers and the different levels of education, like, probably they didn't.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with that, I think.
Yeah. So that would be something that could be useful to look into, but I think that really takes sort of it takes sort of like a repetitive understanding and kind of getting, really it requires a teach-back method too, is having the patient say, like, basically saying, okay, so I've explained to you, you know, that you have whatever disease, can you tell me how you're going to take your medication? Like how you would tell a friend. And so when you do that, then you ensure that they've at least processed and understood what you've said. The challenge, though, is it's always pitted against the amount of time you have. And so when you have a huge line out the door, like, how well does that work? And so at the same time, if you had a medical student who's fluent in Spanish, like, having them sit down with the patient and spend time to go through that could actually be useful. You know? Yeah,
and you're right. It's an investment of like manpower to sit down and kind of almost be redundant, but it could have a better payoff if it makes them finish their prescription.
Right.
Yeah. So did you feel any awkward experiences or any uncomfortableness or anything else that might have stopped you from acting at like full capacity the way you might have expected? Were there any like cultural like faux pas or anything?
Not that I can think of. I think generally, that's a good question. Maybe we can come back to it. I'll see if I can think of anything.
Okay.
But,
you can also email me if you think of something tomorrow.
Yeah, but I would say that as far as I can think of, no. As long as you're kind of flexible, open-minded, and do your best to communicate, you'll. You know, and like on the first day of the clinic, it was sort of like you're trying to figure out what's going on. It's chaotic and whatever,
Yeah.
But a lot of it just comes down to saying, okay, like let's use the experience of people who've been here before, and also just go with the flow and see like, okay, this is working well, this isn't working well, and just kind of learning on the fly.
Great. Do you have any other tips for me and like my friends who are going about how we could, I guess, adapt to our roles most effectively and be effective for the time we're there?
Yeah, so I would say, like, take as much time as you possibly can just to get to know the people and understand the way that they think. And that can be really scary initially because they speak a different language. You don't want to and you feel like, oh, well, I'm not very good at speaking Spanish. Like, how am I even going to know what they're saying? And what you realize quickly is that, like, yes, it's challenging to carry out an everyday conversation even sometimes. But the more you do it, the more you learn about, okay, the way they approach things, like the way what they actually think, and it just gives you a totally different perspective. And that's really, in a short-term trip, like, that's what you can take away. And so doing that as much as possible, just putting yourself out there, and when you're standing there with a patient, or you're in a room and they're like waiting for some clinician or whatever to come in, just like start talking to the patient. Say, how are you doing? Like, what has your experience been like? How long have you been in the hospital? Just ask like as many questions as you can. Your Spanish will get better. And if you have no idea what they're saying and you smile and nod, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, especially if they're in the hospital and they're pregnant and they're dealing with all this craziness, just having someone who seems like they care and is interested in you, that alone is a positive thing when you're in a foreign place with all these like drapes, and it's just a very out of body kind of experience to be in a hospital.
That's actually interesting what you just said, because we feel out of place because we're not from Nicaragua, but so do they, because they're not in a clinic that often. They're talking to Americans who don't speak the same language in many cases. So it's actually a very good point. It's a two-way thing.
Right. You're both outsiders in a way, and finding a way to bridge that and create sort of a zone of comfort in a place that's uncomfortable, I think, for both of you, can be a really positive experience and can make it feel less sort of awkward for both sides.
So you speak Spanish. You said you studied it in high school and at college also?
Yeah, so I was lucky enough to study it from kindergarten, actually, through all the way through. That didn't mean that I was pretty good at it. It was weird. In kindergarten we had this program where we do it for 15 minutes a day. I really don't think it had any impact at all. But
I bet that was like some kind of educational experiment. Like,
they got rid of it.
That's great. That's hilarious. I took French in preschool. I don't know anything now.
Right.
Oh, it's so funny.
It is funny, and like
French of all languages too.
Yeah, and they just every year we had a new teacher, so the accents just changed dramatically. And when you're a student and you go from someone who has like Spanish from like Latin America to someone who has Spanish from Barcelona and has a lisp, you're like, how do I say any? It was it was like absolutely.
That's funny. I did the FSP in Buenos Aires, so they have quite an accent down there too, and they use vos instead of tu.
Right. So
I liked it though.
That was happening too, and it was like, okay, I'm just learning this language, and everything's changing. It was weird. But yeah, then I took it in college, and that was when I really cemented it. And and I certainly was nowhere near like fluent, but I knew that if I tried long enough, I could communicate anything that I really needed to or wanted to. And so, just the key is like putting yourself out there and just making yourself do it.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to practicing. So I took the FSP when I was in my sophomore spring.
Yeah.
So it's been over like a year and a half since then. I'm taking a Spanish class in the winter to finish my minor, and I haven't like taken academic Spanish in so long.
Yeah.
So this will definitely be like a good refresher before I take that class.
Yeah, and that'll be awesome. It's nice that you'll have had like, I think reading in another language and being able to do that effectively, you learn so much like vocab, expand your vocabulary a lot.
Grammar,
and I never had that real like experience.
I see.
So that'll be awesome that you've had that through your mind.
Yeah, I hope so. So then, I guess from like a more personal view, what are some of the lessons that you think you've learned from the Nicaraguans you met? And do you think that this will change the setting or way in which you view medicine, or the way, like the setting in which you practice medicine later on?
Yeah.
And what do you think you may have taught them in return?
Yeah. I think first of all, it will have a major impact on the way that I work in the future and my interests. I think after going on these sorts of trips, it makes you really want to contribute to caring for underserved populations, because one thing that I think is sort of pervasive in our culture is we tend to ignore those who are at the bottom of the totem pole in terms of their income and or where they are in the world, right? Like Nicaragua is not a place that's part of the dominant Western European kind of sphere, and so having being able to really get to know people and to learn from people who come from that background. I mean, you just see what great people and how intelligent they are, despite all the things you get from the media and what you're sort of like implicitly is communicated to you. And so, I definitely feel a strong desire to like contribute to underserved populations in the future using medicine.
Great. Yeah.
And then in terms of what they, sorry, can you just remind me? There were a few questions.
Oh yeah. So what do you think you may have learned from them, and what do you think that you may have taught them that's going to last over time?
Yeah. So I think one thing that I've learned is that there are so many different ways that you can like approach any given problem, any given situation, and so having an open mind to that, and also being able to understand that what we do in a Western, from a Western perspective, or a solution that we come up with, like even that sending someone for an EKG, right? Here, that's a reflex. And literally the other day, I had a patient who came in and had heart problems and got an EKG within 30 seconds of leaving the room. So it takes kind of tailoring your approach medically and on an interpersonal level to be able to connect most effectively with different populations. And I think that that's really one of the things I got out of this trip and learned from the Nicaraguans is that we're both human and we both have so many things we share in common, like just talking about family and the importance and how we spend our time. Like those were really like instructive things for me, and so I enjoyed getting to do that, and so you learn kind of the common shared humanity, but at the same time you also see the cultural differences that you need to keep in mind when you're practicing. And so what I really learned from them is the importance of realizing people come from different places, and so whatever medical thing you recommend has to really keep that in mind.
Yeah, that sounds like something that's important for anyone to know, like any adult, but also especially someone who wants to be a physician,
Yeah, and it's something that you won't necessarily get just working in the Upper Valley. Like I'm working at the VA, and yes, like there are some differences, but it's a relatively homogeneous population because, it's predominantly white veterans who are male, and so it's a smaller, like the variation is less. And so being able to go to a place where people think very differently is useful because it keeps you on your toes, so that when someone comes in, you can be saying, okay, is the solution I'm proposing really going to work for this person, or are they going to basically like go home and never do this and never have their problem resolved because what you're recommending doesn't really make any sense to them.
Sure. Cool. I hope I say the same things. So the last thing I want to ask you about is actually a little bit more about me than the CCSP, I guess. So me and my friend Patricia are working on a final project for this class we're taking with Professor Moody, and we have to create some sort of artifact, he said, to bring to Nicaragua. And I don't know if it necessarily has to be a physical item. It could be like a brochure or some kind of presentation. But Patricia and I want to focus on dental health. And so I guess I'm sure you saw, and what I've heard is that the kids there don't have very good dental hygiene habits. I guess like they don't brush very frequently or at all. So Patricia and I were thinking of something that we could create that might help enforce better brushing behavior over time, because we're going to be distributing toothbrushes and toothpaste.
Yeah.
And like we were talking about, say, with prescriptions, it's important they finish the prescription. It's important that these kids actually use the toothbrushes, say, like for the next couple of years or something.
Yeah.
So I actually have like a prototype of something that we're working on.
Nice.
And we wanted to make like a toothbrush holder, and it would hold the toothbrush but also have a cartoon on it with some kind of like positive messages on dental hygiene. And this is like, alright, so we were testing different like paints on it, right? That's why it looks so ugly. And we're gonna have like slightly different wording on it. But the idea is that I cut this out with a laser cutter.
Wow, yeah,
in the
it's
wood
really
shop.
good. Sweet.
So it's really cheap to make. It's like 60 cents for this. And then our idea was to cut them out here and then bring them with us unassembled. so that the kids could color them in as sort of like an arts and crafts
Oh
project.
yeah, that's a great idea.
And our thinking is that if they're like very proud of it and want to display it in their house, and like the toothbrush goes in like this,
Yeah.
it might like enforce better brushing habits.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
So I just want to hear your thoughts on it. If you have any recommendations on the design or any thoughts that you want to share, because right now we're still kind of revising it.
I think it's a great idea. And it looks really good. In terms of thoughts, I think it's a really good idea. I think it'll be a great way to kind of connect with the kids there. They're so much fun, and it's like, I think that's one of the best things that we can sort of show them, is that, like, as Americans, like, given the history and given sort of the way Americans in the West generally interfaces with the developing world, we can show that we're more than just, that we're people who actually care about them, that we're not just there to, like, benefit ourselves or to, like, boost our resumes. Like, there's so much history of, like, going to a place, doing research, and leaving without giving any credit to the people there who were instrumental in the research. So, like, things like that, where you basically just kind of take advantage, or, even in the very historical times of, like taking whatever, like mining from a land and just removing all the resources. And so we can go against that by really valuing the people there. And so I think this is a really great way to kind of connect with kids there and just be able to bond and have something to kind of work on together. So I think that's a great idea.
Cool. Well, thanks for sharing.
Yeah, thanks.
I really like this little thing.
It's really awesome. Nice,
Thanks.
dude. Good job.
So that's all I have for you. Is there anything you want to ask me, or anything else that you were wondering? You don't have to if you don't want to ask anything.
I'd love to hear sort of how you're feeling right now about the trip and how you've thought the course has been overall.
Okay. So I think the course has been pretty good. I think that it's definitely a very honest look at the phenomena of, like, volunteer service trips and how they definitely have been commercialized to a point. Like, I remember reading in one of our class readings, there's an example of a volunteer service trip that a company would set up, but then outsource the volunteering to, like, a commercial travel agency in the country. So, like, you do a little bit of volunteering, but it's mostly like a tour, like a sightseeing kind of deal.
Right.
So I think that we've definitely had a really critical perspective on these kind of things, and I think, I don't know, I don't want to say we're too pessimistic about it, but I think it's important to understand what is bad about these trips, but also how it can be good, and how we're going to try and bring those things with us when we do what we're doing. But overall, I like the course so far. I think a lot of the homeworks are actually really productive. They make us get to know our classmates better, which is great because we're going to be going to the country with them. And overall, I'm pretty happy with the course.
Awesome.
And I'm getting really excited for the trip as we get closer and closer to it.
Nice. I'm so glad to hear that the class got off the ground. It's so exciting that it was approved. And
I guess you're responsible for laying the groundwork for that, right?
So I'm one of many people. There were before me other students who also tried to get this going, but it's just exciting to see it actually happening. So that's awesome. And I think that it was a really good experience, and I think that being critical about these things is really valuable, because having seen some of the ways that Dartmouth does this effectively and that other schools do these sort of partnerships in a more longitudinal sense, it can be done, but it comes only with people who are very critical about the way things are currently going and the way that they're being done. So I think that's great to have that approach, and I think it'll serve you well no matter what you decide to do, because having a critical lens about, okay, why are things being done this way, and is this the best way to do it, is always, I think, something that leads to positive changes, outcomes.
Great. Well, thanks a lot. Thanks so much for meeting with me.
Yeah,
I
sure.
appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for the coffee.